Today we're going to be chatting about autism and sensory processing disorder, and we'll dive into the differences between the two and then the overlap. If you're new to Glow Within, welcome. My name's Katie Connolly. I'm a registered clinical counselor, craniosacral therapist, founder of a registered children's yoga school, and mom to two, among a few other things. I'm obviously very passionate about my work, and a part of my work as a neuroaffirming clinical counselor is working with the different diagnoses and labels that show up. And so I strive to really bring a strength-based and empowered approach to diagnosis. There are many beauties in understanding the self better and why maybe we do what we do, and through that being able to get support to really holistically support the individual. And so I've shared this in a few other videos, I think, but often when we get really good holistic support, we start to see symptoms diminish, which I think can be really empowering. It doesn't mean that we've lost the label or who we are or identity, but rather that we have the tools to support ourselves to thrive, which is really the goal. So in this video, I wanted to talk about autism versus sensory processing disorder. So autism is a spectrum of different characteristics. So when we look at a diagnosis for autism, there are things like how we socially engage, communicate, understand those social cues, repetition of behaviors. Sensory processing is one of the things that is looked at and maybe struggles with some of the sensory processing. Note, I'm not using the word disorder. And then there's a few other little things as well in there, not to diminish anything. But then we look at sensory processing. It's called disorder. I prefer differences or extrasensory perception as something else. So sensory processing is not in the DSM. So it's not a diagnosis. It fits into autism. However, sensory processing presents in so many different ways. So I think it's really important to understand that. And I have broken it down numerous times in other videos as well. So you're welcome to go take a peek there. Sensory processing is a really big and interesting one. And I actually came across a post today that was talking about throwing out the sensory processing label altogether. And there are some interesting reasons for it. One, that it isn't a official diagnosis, but I think there's a place for it, right? I think it's important to have that common language, and this also speaks to that PDA, or pathological demand avoidance, or pervasive demand for autonomy, sort of expression as well. And it does give us common language, which is helpful, particularly when we're looking at supporting our children in schools, etc. But it can also be stigmatizing. So I think how we understand it, how we present it, and how we talk about it is really, really important. And then, of course, because all of these are really big spectrums and there is so much overlap, even like autism, ADHD, sensory processing, anxiety, they often all go together. And so it makes me, on the other hand, also question, what is the purpose in the label, right? What is the purpose in having this if it's not actually articulating clearly the individual's experience? And so I talked about this in a previous video as well. It can be very helpful to get the resources, to have the diagnosis, to have the community and the language around it. And unfortunately, we usually do have to go through quite a demoralizing, hopefully not for you, but it can be for many, experience to get that label, right? It's very deficit-based, very disorder-based. But we're not still understanding the full context of that individual, their strengths and their weaknesses, which is why I tend to take more of a different approach to this. So within autism, like I shared initially, there's a huge spectrum, right? And I guess it was last year in July, they did a study and it showed there's 4 different types of autism. So that expands some of the complexities, but can also help to explain different individuals and some of their experiences. Again, it's still limiting, still doesn't focus on all the strengths and weaknesses. And we all have strengths and weaknesses regardless if we're diagnosed with something or not, right? That's just part of being human, right? We all have traits, even the trait, for example, of being hopeful. We look at one end of the spectrum and it can be really, really positive, and then we look at the other end of the spectrum and there can be challenges in that, right? So I think it's important to take a really balanced perspective when we're looking at these things. And within sensory processing, there's so many different types, and how we need to support the individual differs with each type. So it could be that the individual gets overwhelmed very easily by certain sensory stimuli, and that individual might then be sensory withdrawing or more sensory seeking. It can also show up as an individual, again, to some degree, being bombarded by the sensory overload, and then they struggle to process it, right? Struggle to make sense of all that information coming in. And so they might need to step away to really understand the whole experience before returning, before being able to participate and respond to what they're being presented with. Then there's another type where it's more connected to the information is taken in, but then the body is not sure how to physically, like through motor movement, respond. So it really shows up in a variety of ways. And to me, this really speaks to the need to understand the uniqueness of the individual. Diagnosis can be important. Definitely, I would say if your child or you are struggling day to day, I would pursue a diagnosis. And with that, you can get further supports depending on where you live. So I do think there's a lot of value in that, and even just in understanding and having the resources to be able to thrive and to be able to set yourself or your child up for success. So it's quite a complex issue. But I think the biggest takeaway here is that sensory processing alone is very, very complex. It's not in the DSM. It's not a formal diagnosis. It does overlap with autism. So if you have a autism diagnosis, definitely take that piece into account and all of the different types of sensory processing and how you can support the individual there, because that really ties into the nervous system and the overall experience, their overall well-being, and then how they're able to thrive. So reach out, get the resources that you need. I'm here if you have any questions. Feel free to take a look at some of the other videos that I've posted, particularly on sensory processing. There can be so many gifts in these experiences and ways of being. So a diagnosis is not limiting, right? So within it, we can definitely find an empowering way to support ourselves and our children.